So thank you so much, everybody, for joining our late Qing lecture series. Just to recap on everything we have. So the late Qing began in 1840 with the First Opium War, when the British, well, I'm taking the Chinese side, when the British invaded China because they want to send opium into the country, took Hong Kong. And then the second one was on the Second Opium War from 1856 to 1860, where the British and the French invaded China again and burned down the Summer Palace, and the emperor at the time, Xianfeng, died. And the third series was the Taiping Rebellion, which actually it is still the biggest war in history, of human history in terms of casualties. 70 million people died, which is 10 Hong Kongs. And after that, as we've mentioned before, it was a period of modernization. The Qing government realized that they have to modernize. So it was from the 1860s to 1894. It was a period of modernization, of like the empire coming back to life. And then everything went in shambles from 1894 to 95, when China was badly defeated by the Japanese. And the Japanese demanded a huge reparation, in a war reparation, and then ceded Taiwan. And then China went into a rise of consciousness, a realization that you can't just, back in the modernization period, where the Chinese system is the greatest system in the world, we just need to modernize with Western technology. That dream is gone. And from then on, there was a period of modernization, a rise in consciousness, which led to our previous talk in 1898, where it was the 100 Days Reform, where the Emperor Guangxu started this 100-day reform, which, as mentioned last time, was in conflict with the special interest of the Manchurians. And the Manchurians were the essence of the Qing Empire. And so with the ending of that, the Empress Dowager came back. And when the Empress Dowager came back, she wanted to do one thing, which led to probably one of the biggest episodes, especially for Westerners in the late Qing period, and that's the Boxer Rebellion. I think it was, probably most people know about it from Charlton Heston's movie, right? Like 49 Nights in Beijing or Peking or something like that. Like an old movie, but basically it was a little bit like ISIS today, where a bunch of Chinese people went crazy and started to kill a lot of foreigners, and the foreigners came back and had this coalition to invade China. So it's actually a very famous period in the Westerners' mindset about China. And today, obviously, as I've done so many times, my history is by and large based on the Chinese side of the story, but I try not to be as biased. But before that, we have to talk about the direct effect of the 1898 reform and the failure of it. You remember, like, the 1898 reform was about the Emperor Guangxu using a bunch of Han Chinese to try to reform and to take away the special interest from Manchurians. And because of that, the Empress Dowager, who was the major person behind the Manchurian, or the Manchurian interest behind her, put Guangxu into house arrest. And from then on, the Empress Dowager wanted to get rid of Guangxu and to have a new emperor. And I have to go back to the family tree, and I'll try to make it as simple as possible. Dao Guang had a few sons. I'll just name a few. So the fourth son is Xianfeng. He died. The sixth son, Prince Gong, the famous Prince Gong that led most of the modernization, he died. Prince Chun, whose son is Guangxu. And so we talked about him. He built the Summer Palace, for his son. He died. And so what I think is very important for people to know when they study Chinese history, and especially late Qing history, is that each dynasty has its own power DNA. So, for example, the Song Dynasty from 960 to 1278, it was really a kind of a weak emperor with very strong scholars around him. And so the regime was basically ruled by a bunch of scholars. Now, in the Ming Dynasty, it's very similar. The only difference is that the emperor had a much bigger power base. And so the power, when the emperor in the Ming Dynasty from 1368 to 1644, when they started to not care as much about the government, the eunuchs became to be very influential. Now, with the Qing Dynasty, as I've repeated on and on and on. Before they invaded into the main China, they were still in Manchuria before 1688. It was basically the Emperor Nohachi and Abaha who used his brothers and nephews and cousins fighting, the Aishin-Zhuo clan fighting. So the Qing Dynasty, in its essence, is really about the close-knitted family members ruling together. It's a bit like the Teutonic Knights. And so by this point, it's exactly the same because the older emperors, like the Emperor Qianlong, and they had more power. And so trying to take the power away from his brothers or his cousins. But by this point, Empress Dowager is supposed to be in charge, but she is only a concubine of Xianfeng. And therefore, if you look at the whole late Qing history period from Xianfeng's death in 1860, sometimes Prince Gong was in charge, sometimes Prince Chun was in charge, but they're both gone. So and then Guangxu disgraced himself by taking away the special interest of the Manchurians. So who's in charge? Who's left in charge? And that is, I haven't talked about him yet. Prince Chun had a son, Prince Duan. Prince Duan married the Empress Dowager Cixi's one of her nieces. You remember, niece one married Guangxu, and Guangxu didn't didn't like her, and so they have a son. They have a son called Pu Jun. So the Empress Dowager is playing exactly the same game again. Empress Dowager is probably one of the shrewdest political manipulators in China of all time. So when she realizes she's only a concubine of Xianfeng, she understands that she needs to have someone from within the close-knitted family of Daoguang, but then she'll put her own DNA inside the system. So Guangxu, as mentioned, is her nephew, both from her sister's side and from marriage. And if he is gone, she does it again. She tries to find a new person to replace Guangxu. What did she do? She got someone, Prince Duan, within the close-knitted Aishin-Zhuo family, and at the same time married someone of her own Yehenala clan. And then so she wants to raise Pu Jun to be the new emperor. But when that happened, something out of her expectation happened. And that is, suddenly the whole international community was against it. It's like, we are not going to recognize any other emperor, any other head of state of the Qing Empire other than Guangxu. Because Guangxu, after his 100-day reform, was extremely popular amongst the international community of being someone who is progressive, someone who wanted China to modernize, to enter into the international system. So, and then Cixi was like, what are you talking about? This is like family affair. Like, what do you mean you have a problem with it? This is our own Aishin-Zhuo family affair.
You have no say in this matter.
Yeah, like, or like for her, it's like like she had no understanding. She was like, why would this happen? And so she was saying, oh, Guangxu was ill. And when Guangxu was ill, the international diplomats were like, we don't believe you. So they actually sent a French doctor to check Guangxu out to see whether he was really ill or not. So you can think of it, it's extremely weird. Like, it's like David Cameron's ill, and then like China says, I don't believe you. So they got a doctor to go into and like visit David Cameron and see whether he's ill or not. It's kind of equivalent to that. But he checked out and he was like, Guangxu's a little bit thin, which we talked about. You know, he was malnutritious childhood years, but he was basically fine. So you can't dispose of him. And so the Empress Dowager was very mad. And from then on, she really hated the foreigners for stopping her from doing what she wanted to do. And this Pu Jun, so...
Why would the foreigners think...
Yeah.
This is a loaded question. Why would they think that they had any right in this whatsoever?
Well, because they did.
Because which
was that China was in a semi-colonial period, right? So it's there's no self-defense, or at least the defense would not be able to go against the foreigners. So and then
the card that they would play is what? You replace...
We replace them, we might invade you, right? Yeah. And also, like, remember, like, after the Taiping Rebellion, all the southern states were ruled by, or were controlled by governors, very powerful local governors. And one of them is this one, where Shanghai, Jiangsu, Anhui, and Jiangxi. it's Liangjiang, the two jiangs. The governor of that place is called Liu Kunyi. We'll talk about him a lot more later. But he worked for Zheng Guofan to put down the Taiping Rebellion. He sent a telegraph to Empress Dowager and said, you know what? The relationship between the emperor and the subjects is fixed. And the mouths of the foreigners is difficult. It's difficult to cover. So it's basically, he represented the Han Dynasty, the Han local governors. He was like a representative. He was like the 大哥. He's one of the main guys, one of the leaders. And so with that happening, and that's because he's also the governor of Shanghai, so he dealt a lot with the foreigners. Cixi realized you can't do that. So because today it's a very complicated period. So we have to talk about Beijing. Beijing, you have Cixi in the middle, and then you've got the local, and then you've got Liu. Okay, this is in Shanghai area. So Cixi is here, and so one of her most trusted advisors who held most of the armed forces around the Beijing area is an individual called Rong Lu. He would be instrumental. Actually, I'll talk about him later. If it wasn't for him, the foreigners would have partitioned China. It's because of one very little decision that he did during the siege of Beijing in the Boxer Rebellion. And he, incidentally, is Pu Yi's maternal grandfather. So he held most of the armed forces around the Beijing area. And he said, how about this? Let's boil the frog. If you put the frog into hot water, it will jump back out. Put the frog into cold water, just slowly turn up the heat. Make Pu Jun to be the heir apparent, right? And just wait for Guangxu to die. And then he would be next. So let's not talk about disposing or whatever. So Pu Jun was made heir. And when Pu Jun was made heir, his father Duan was very happy. So he threw this huge feast, invited all the diplomats in Beijing to come. Not a single person came, because none of the foreign diplomats felt that he was legitimate. And so, if you can see, again, back to the DNA of the power structure of the late Qing Dynasty, when he's gone as well. So when all the main Huangye, all the main sons of Daoguang is dead, the power, especially within the defense of Beijing itself, went to Duan and one of his cronies, Zai Xun. He's Zhuang Wang, also an Ai prince. Prince Zhuang and Prince Duan then took over the armed forces within Beijing city. And so they were in charge, you could think of it that way, along with Cixi. And Cixi obviously was playing with different sides. But if you look at the whole situation here, within Beijing, yes, you have Prince Duan, you have Prince Zhuang here. The situation in Beijing became very anti-foreign, because the foreigners would not let them dispose of Guangxu. And so, for example, Prince Duan was he was the armed officer. He was the captain of an armed force called Tiger God. Why is it called Tiger God? Because tiger is supposed to eat sheep, and God is supposed to grab the ghosts. Sheep has the same sound as ocean. So an ocean ghost means 鬼佬. This is how it goes. So sheep. So if you eat the sheep ghost, the sheep ghost basically means 鬼佬, 洋鬼, the ghost from the ocean.
So it would be 老外, or no?
It's substantially more derogatory. So it's like 洋鬼 is like a sheep ghost, or in this case, ocean ghost. Ocean and sheep are the same sound. But anyway, so this is the Beijing area. Now we've talked about the Boxer.
Can I ask something quick?
Yep.
When you talk about foreign powers there, are you talking about French, British?
No, all of them. Like French, British, German, American, Russian, Japanese. Those are the main. And so this is the situation in Beijing.
Qingdao came about, right?
Qingdao. So I'm going to talk about it now. So Qingdao is so the Boxer Rebellion. I'm going to talk about. So we talk about the Beijing area. Now we're going to talk about the actual Boxers. The actual Boxers are actually peasants from Shandong province. And from Shandong, and why Shandong? And if you look at it from this way, from 1860, with the Treaty of Peking onwards, the foreign missionaries can then go to inland to start preaching the Christian message. From 1860 to 1899, in those 40 years, there were 811 religious incidences. When I say religious incidences, they are basically conflicts between the local the locals to either the Chinese Christians or the Christian missionaries. 811. So basically in China every 10 days. And the place that happened was in fights, basically in Shandong. And so why would there be fights? It's basically because most people who joined Christianity were not really religious per se. It was mostly because they do not want to. They don't want to. It's because they need a power to protect them, because they know. So if you let's say you're a triad member or whatever, and the government's gonna arrest you or something, you become Christian. And so if you become Christian, you then have the protection of the foreigners, and you know that the local Qing officials are more scared of the foreign missionaries, and therefore you have a natural protection. And so there were also peasants who did not want to join. And so there was a huge tension. And so one of the cases is actually in Shandong, where in 1891, the Christians actually bought a plot of land, originally a local Chinese god temple, tore it down and built a church. And so the locals were actually furious, right? And then so all these kind of tension. It's all. So the Christians do it again and again and again. And also Shandong, it's like the perfect storm. Firstly, it's because for the last few years of the 19th century, it was a huge drought. So and then there was overpopulation. For example, they say if for a family of 5, you need Chinese hectares of 5 acres to live. But most people only get 30% of an acre. So each you can sell your daughter for 50 cents at the time. So and then because it was huge drought, and then and it was overpopulation. That's why most of the Han Chinese, most of the Chinese that you see in the northeast, like Liaoning, and they're actually from Shandong. They actually fled to Shandong because it was illegal to flee to Shandong at the time. But to flee to Dongbei at the time, but you had to, because otherwise you would die. And then another thing is, Chinese in the Ming and Qing Dynasty, the capital is in Beijing, but most of the crops were actually grown in southern China. So there would be from the Great River would actually go from southern China to northern China. But because the foreigners came, you've got the Swires or whoever who had you could go by the ocean route. You don't need the people to go. You don't need the same transportation. But these transportation, if you think about it, these are like hungry, strong men. So if suddenly they go unemployed and they don't want to join Christianity, they have to organize themselves. And what's the best way to organize themselves is usually like this: ignorance. If people are ignorant and full, if they have enough to eat, nothing will happen. But if you're ignorant and if you're hungry, you gather together, and the best thing to gather people together is by some kind of religion. And that's why if you cannot deal with the Christians, they didn't have to kneel to the local governor, but you had to. So you had to organize yourself to go against either the Christians, the Chinese Christians, and people who back them up, the ghosts, the ghost ministers. So they all start organizing themselves, and they call themselves the Boxer. Because Boxer is because they can train. It's the kind of Chinese superstition of like some kind of ghost, some kind of an ancient god that would possess you. And then once the god possesses you, you don't have to be scared of any of the guns or cannons of the guailos.
What is the Chinese name of the Boxer rebellion?
义和团. Yi means loyalty, like brotherhood. He means harmony. So loyalty and harmony together, fighting the common enemy. which is the ghosts. And so it was like, for example, let's say a Guaylo, a Westerner, we call 大毛子. The biggest Mao means hair. So the biggest hair guy. So is that
this hair, not this hair. Right?
Both hair. So it's like, so basically foreigners are like white guys really hairy. So 大毛子. A Christian's 二毛子. So you are the second. You're like the second of the hairy ones. And then there'll be the third 毛子, which is like, let's say, for example, someone got murdered for having a pencil and paper. So like if you use foreign stuff, you're like number 3 hairy ones. So and they would fight, and then there'll be like songs and chants, and basically saying, why is there a huge drought here in Shandong? Oh, because the churches are way too tall, and so it covers the sky, and therefore there's no rain coming down. Why why are the ancestors so angry at us that would give us drought? Because we allow the foreigners to build telegraph lines and railway tracks. And the railway tracks are disturbing the sleep of the foreigners. And you know what?
Disturbing sleep of the ancestors.
Oh, sorry, of the ancestors. Yeah, of the ancestors. And you know what? How can you tell that foreigners are really ghosts? Look them in the eye. It's turning blue. So it's and so we must in order for us to go back to the equilibrium of rainfall and everything, we must take away the telegraph lines, we must destroy the rail lines, and we must kill all the foreigners. Okay, so that's the gist of the story of why it was happening in 1898, and it's especially because Shandong of all places was actually the sphere of influence of the Germans. And if you go back to your European history, you realize, that Germany was united under Bismarck, William I in 1871, and then in 1888 it was William II who was emperor, and then he, unlike Bismarck and William I, he wasn't into restraint, because his mother is the daughter of Queen Victoria, right? And then so his mother was telling him all the great things about Britain, and then he was like, no, I'm going to show mom that Germany can be just as great. So he opened the world map. And we're like, okay, let's colonize. And they were like, crap, everything is British. So they took like 2 or 3 random countries in Africa. And in China, the place is Shandong. So the Germans were extremely aggressive. As the missionary, this might be very generalizing, but the missionaries of Americans and the British tend to be more about the religion and more about, let's say, the healthcare side of things and the education side of things. But the Germans were more about the imperial invasion. So like all these conflicts, like for example, the one we talked about in 1897 when 2 of the German missionaries got killed, the Germans came and took Qingdao, and that's why Qingdao beer came about. It was actually a religious incident because of the 2 missionaries got killed. That's why the Germans used that as an excuse to take Jiaozhouwan, and Jiaozhouwan on top of that is Qingdao. And from Qingdao, you have Qingdao beer. So next time you have a Qingdao beer, you think about the 2 German missionaries who died for the beer that you're drinking. Yeah.